You're sitting still. You're supposed to be sitting still. But your knee is bouncing, your eyes keep drifting to the door, and some part of your brain is already 3 thoughts ahead of whatever you're actually supposed to be doing. You call that a flaw. A glitch. Something to medicate, manage, apologize for. But what if that same brain, dropped into a forest 40,000 years ago, wasn't broken at all? What if it was the reason your ancestors survived? That's the uncomfortable question hiding behind a diagnosis most people think is a modern invention. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. A label stamped onto restless kids in fluorescent classrooms. But strip away the classroom, strip away the desk, strip away the entire structure of modern life, and something strange happens to the symptoms. They stop looking like deficits. Here's the thing. ADHD is usually described by what it lacks. Deficit is right there in the name. Reduced attention. Reduced impulse control. Reduced patience for repetitive tasks. Doctors measure it against a baseline of what a functional, focused, rule-following person looks like. But that baseline is incredibly new. Sitting at a desk for 8 hours. Following a fixed schedule. Ignoring every distraction in the room to stare at one screen. That is not the environment your brain evolved in. That is barely a few hundred years old, and for most people on the planet even that is a stretch. For most of human history, the environment looked nothing like that. Now zoom out. Anthropologists who study the last remaining hunter-gatherer societies have documented something that should make you rethink the whole premise. In 2008, evolutionary psychologist Justin Garcia and his research collaborators tied a specific gene variant linked to ADHD, the DRD4-7R allele, to nomadic populations. Groups that moved frequently in search of food carried the variant at dramatically higher rates than settled agricultural groups. The same gene that gets a child a diagnosis today may have gotten an ancestor a meal. That sounds obvious, until you look closer. Because genes tied to novelty-seeking and restlessness are not automatically good or bad. They are context-dependent. And the context ancient humans lived in rewarded exactly the traits modern classrooms punish. Think about what hunting actually demands. Not the movie version, the real version. Long stretches of monitoring a wide, chaotic environment. Sudden shifts in attention when a sound changes. Instant decisions with no time to deliberate. Constant movement between tasks, track, scan, react, adjust, move again. A brain wired to hyper-focus on one narrow task for hours would miss the rustle in the grass. A brain wired to constantly scan, get bored fast, and jump toward novelty would catch it. Researchers have a name for this. The hunter versus farmer hypothesis, first proposed by psychiatrist Tom Hartman in the 1990s and later explored more rigorously by evolutionary anthropologists. The idea is blunt. ADHD traits were an asset in a hunting and foraging economy and only became a liability once agriculture demanded something completely different, staying in one place, tending one field, repeating one task across an entire season. And that is where the story gets complicated, because agriculture is only about 12,000 years old. That's nothing on an evolutionary timescale. Your brain did not have time to fully rewire itself for rows of crops and fixed schedules. In evolutionary terms, we are still hunter-gatherer brains wearing farmer clothing. But here's where a good skeptic pushes back, and they should. Because correlation between a gene variant and a nomadic lifestyle does not prove causation. Maybe the gene did not cause anyone to hunt better. Maybe it just happened to spread in mobile populations for unrelated reasons, like genetic drift, or founder effects when small groups split off and traveled. Human genetics researcher Kenneth Kidd and colleagues cautioned in their own analyses that a single gene variant almost never explains a complex behavioral trait on its own. ADHD, as clinically defined, involves dozens of interacting genes, not one heroic allele that flips a switch labeled hunter mode. Attributing an entire behavioral profile to one variant is the kind of simplification that makes a great headline and a shaky science paper. That skepticism is fair. The genetics of attention are messy, tangled, and nowhere near fully mapped. A single study from 2008 linking one gene to nomadism is suggestive, not conclusive. It would be irresponsible to treat it as a settled fact. And yet the pattern does not stop with genetics. Because paleoanthropologists studying tool use and hunting strategies keep finding evidence that the specific cognitive style associated with ADHD, quick shifting attention, high responsiveness to novelty, low tolerance for monotony, would have mapped almost perfectly onto the daily reality of Pleistocene survival. Archaeologist Curtis Marian, who has spent decades excavating early human coastal sites in South Africa, has argued that early Homo sapiens' survival depended on exploiting unpredictable, shifting resources, tides, seasonal migrations, unstable plant yields. A cognitive profile built for sustained, narrow focus is poorly suited to an environment that punishes you for missing sudden change. Let that sit for a moment. The very traits schools now flag as problems, distractibility, restlessness, impulsivity, may be echoes of a cognitive toolkit built for exactly the kind of unstable, high-stakes, constantly shifting world your ancestors actually lived in. Now bring that back to you. Every time you feel that itch to check your phone mid-task, every time a long meeting makes your skin crawl, every time repetitive work feels almost physically unbearable, you might be running software optimized for scanning a savanna, not sitting in a cubicle. But this is where the story stops being tidy, because there is a moral trap hiding inside this reframe, and it is worth naming directly. Turning ADHD into an ancient superpower narrative can slide into something dishonest. It can minimize real struggle. For a lot of people, ADHD is not a secret evolutionary gift. It is genuinely disabling. It disrupts relationships, careers, self-esteem, safety. Framing it purely as misplaced hunter genius risks romanticizing something that causes real daily suffering, and researchers who study the disorder clinically are right to push back hard against oversimplified, feel-good evolutionary storytelling. So the honest answer sits in an uncomfortable middle. The traits are almost certainly ancient. The mismatch with modern structure is almost certainly real. But that does not mean every person diagnosed today is secretly a frustrated Paleolithic hunter trapped in fluorescent lighting. It means human cognition evolved across an enormous range of styles, because different environments rewarded different strategies, and industrial civilization narrowed the range of acceptable behavior far faster than biology could adapt. There is a useful precedent here. Left-handedness was once treated as a defect, something to correct, punish, or hide, until researchers eventually understood it as one branch of normal neurological variation rather than a malfunction. Attention style may be heading toward a similar reevaluation. Not proof that everything is fine, but proof that categories built around what looks convenient for one kind of society can miss what is actually a wide, functional range of human wiring. And the deeper you go, the stranger the reframe becomes. Because it is not just genetics and cognition. It is social structure too. In small, mobile hunter-gatherer bands, the entire group often function like a single distributed attention system. Some members watched for predators. Some tracked food sources. Some handled tools. Some managed relationships and conflict. A restless, quick-shifting mind was not a burden on the group. It was a specialized role inside it. Modern life removed that distribution. It took one uniform standard: sit still, focus narrowly, follow the schedule, and applied it to every brain regardless of what that brain was built to do. The mismatch was not invented by pharmaceutical companies or lazy teachers. It was baked into the shift from a socially distributed cognitive system to an individualized, standardized one. That is not a comfortable answer, and it should not be. Because it means some of the most painful modern experiences are not personal failures. They are the friction of an ancient mind grinding against an environment engineered for something else entirely.